way our covenant learning and our covenant theme for the year, which is the journey home. And when I proposed this to Billy, he had lots to say about it. And of course, he helped me fine tune, what we might share. But though I had suggested something different for Sunday morning, he said, no, we should talk. And I said, well, why the heck would people want to listen to us talk? And he said, they'll pay money for it. So we'd like everybody to make a donation to the Billy and Jeffrey Fund. Not true. You don't have to pay us a penny. It's our privilege. But the truth is, we could talk for the next 3 hours. That would not be a problem.
We've been talking for the last 40 years.
We've been talking for the last 40 years about everything and nothing. Sometimes those are the same thing. So we're going to try to focus it in. The theme for this morning is we use discovering, finding home on the journeys wherever you are, which is wise. So it means that Billy must have come up with it. And it's really going to help us explore the connection we share and how the idea and the core concept of home has evolved, developed, changed over the course of time. And you'll be able to hear those same, I bet, changes in, understandings, insights in your own life. And if you have questions along the way, just throw them in the chat and eventually we'll try to get to them. So I know a little bit about this because I actually visited Cincinnati with Billy, and I got to see and meet his dad. May he rest in peace. Dr. Dreskin.
Where did we meet him?
We met him in Cincinnati. We didn't meet him at Skyline, did we?
Yes, of course we did. Where else would we meet him?
We met him at Skyline Chili. And let me just say this right off the bat. Skyline Chili is not chili. It is not. Cincinnati folks don't know what the hell they're eating. It is disgusting. If you've had Skyline Chili, chat me, all right, about your personal experience. It has like cinnamon in it. It's on top of spaghetti.
It's watery.
They went to the wrong grocery store. I don't understand what the problem is.
Okay, all right. Time for a rebuttal. If you are from Cincinnati, and you don't actually have to be from Cincinnati to love Skyline Chili, but it appears to have originated in Greece, and a number of families that immigrated to Cincinnati, because why wouldn't you? They opened up Greek restaurants, but it was Greek chili restaurants, very different from Tex-Mex, very watery. We put it over spaghetti or hot dogs, add cheese, onions, black olives, and people love it. And I mean, love it so much so that when I would go back to Cincinnati for a visit, we went back for several b'nai mitzvah and weddings. I would not consume any food at these celebrations because I was saving myself. When the party was over, when the reception was over, we would head over to Skyline Chili. It was that important to us. So your rabbi, who's usually quite wise, has no idea what he's talking about.
So now with a segue seamlessly into my question, what was life like? What did home mean for your formative years in Cincinnati?
I could ask you the same question, except you didn't come from Cincinnati.
But you know what? They hear all about 510th Avenue in Haverhill, Massachusetts. For you, what did home mean?
Okay, so you should understand that Cincinnati was my family's home because three brothers, my father and his two brothers, they all grew up in Newark, New Jersey. And when they got their medical degrees, they agreed between the three of them, and they loved each other dearly. So I'm not quite sure why they did this. They each picked a different part of the country to settle in and to build a practice. One of my uncles went to Los Angeles. One uncle went to Greenville, South Carolina, and my dad chose Cincinnati, Ohio. So that's the only reason that I know that we settled there. Growing up in Cincinnati in really the 1960s, I was born in 1957. Growing up there in the 60s, it was wonderful for me. I was pretty oblivious to the unrest going on around me. It was only a few years ago that I discovered that my mother, who died about 5 years ago, that she had marched with Martin Luther King. I didn't even know Martin Luther King came to Cincinnati. That's how oblivious I was at the time. But I loved growing up there. If you heard last night's concert, you may have heard a few of these details. I'm the youngest of 6 children, and so my home was a busy beehive of activity. I was in awe of my older siblings, watching them living their lives. Any of you who have an older brother or sister, you may remember back when you thought they were just the most amazing creature on the planet. And I had 5 of them. So I loved living at home, being at home, even as my home was disintegrating, as my parents' marriage fell apart, as my siblings went off to their lives and really college and beyond. They never came back until it was just me and my mom. And then what became the center of my home life as a teenager, because I was feeling really lost, was my temple. I had dropped out. It's kind of a fun story. I had dropped out of religious school in 8th grade. So I made it through 7th grade. And then 8th grade, I went back, and it was 1971. So 1971, I had very long hair. I dressed in jeans and a blue jean jacket, probably a black t-shirt. And I actually, I loved religious school. And the rabbi's wife taught a class on Israel, on modern Israel. And what I loved most about this class was that we could ask any question that we wanted. Nothing was off limits. Until one day, her husband, the rabbi, appeared at the door of the classroom and said, "May I see Mr. Dreskin?" And I went out into the hallway, and that rabbi proceeded to throw me up against a wall in the hall and tell me what he would do to me if I ever disrespected his wife again, which is when I realized that I'm not always in touch what other people's feelings are about what I'm doing. She apparently really resented all the questions that I asked. I said to the rabbi, "You don't have to worry. I will never set foot in a temple again in my life." And I walked out the door. And what happened throughout the rest of high school, besides eventually coming back into Temple because all the personnel changed, it became a really cool place, is I got very involved in Temple Youth Group. And on reflection, I found that the friends that I made in Temple Youth Group, I loved going home with them because I loved spending time with their intact families. Their parents became kind of surrogate parents to me. I was very devoted to them and just adored having dinner at their homes. And by the end of high school, because of this kind of enveloping love that I received from my temple, oddly enough, in light of that story, and from all these families associated with my temple, that had become home. And I think that's why I wanted to become a rabbi, because I got that sense of home and I wanted to be able to share it, which indeed was what I hope I did throughout my career.
But when you were like in high school and you were very, I mean, you were, as you said, and I know, you were a finalist in the National Federation of Temple Youth Song Competition. So you were composing, right. You were a musical kid. So were you thinking, I'm going to be a rabbi someday after this rabbi threw you up against the wall?
So that rabbi left. No, he didn't. He was still there, but I had nothing to do with him. A new temple educator came in, and he really turned the temple learning system on its head. He did really cool things like had us, instead of, I think there were 3 classes on any given Sunday morning, and I was part of a special class that didn't go to temple. We met at a rabbinical student's home for the morning and did our learning there. And that was, I mean, you can imagine today that doesn't shake any branches, but that was pretty amazing at the time. The educator himself said to me one day, Billy, I want you to take the next semester off. I don't want you to come to any classes. This wasn't like the rabbi. This guy actually liked me. He said, I want you to stay home and I want you to write music. Now, what's really interesting about this is I had never written music. I had never composed a song. I think he probably heard me play piano in youth group, maybe something like that. And he came up with the idea that he would hire an HUC rabbinical student to tutor me in whatever it is that I wanted to set to music. I said to him, well, I'd like to learn how to read the Kaddish. And so I spent a semester studying with the student how to read the Kaddish, how to understand the Kaddish, and then setting it to music, which I'd never done in my life. And that piece of music, not only did it make it to the finals in the Nifty Song Competition, we can talk about how I lost, but also how I met Ellen through it, but turned me on to a whole avenue in life that I think what you're alluding to, Jeffrey, would become a big question mark as to whether or not I would follow the musical route or the rabbit.
You just explain to people, because you're talking about rabbinical students left and right. Why was Cincinnati, besides the chili, a great place to grow up Jewishly?
So because Cincinnati has Greek chili, Hebrew Union College decided to open up one of its campuses there so that all rabbinical students, I don't think there were cantorial students there at the time, could have the benefit of the gastronomic delight that is Skyline Chili. HUC's largest, I think largest campus is still in Cincinnati.
It's original, an original campus, right?
Yes, it is. I guess it's the original Hebrew Union College, and New York was the Jewish Institute of Religion, and then they merged. So it was great growing up there because, like in New York, and you guys getting to have an intern from HUC every year, we got dozens of rabbinical students who would come through, who would teach in our high school, who we would hire for nifty events. So our connections with them, our relationships with them were just amazing. So HUC was there for a few years. The temple was building a new building, and our offices. That was just Larry Gutterman, you should mute, buddy. Larry Gutterman, you should mute. Larry.
But it took an educator wise enough to see you inside and to know you beyond the kid who asked all the questions, who's a troublemaker, who really isn't. He was just very curious.
Yes.
But to say, oh, this kid does music and he's talented.
Yes. It's something that you and I have done, and we hope all clergy do. We watch the kids who grow up in our synagogues, and we certainly love to encourage them to go to HUC themselves and become rabbis and cantors and educators and temple administrators. I don't think I've ever encouraged someone to become a temple administrator. No slight, Jane, against temple administrators, but I just doesn't come to mind. But I've certainly encouraged people to go into politics, to go into law, to go into medicine, whatever it is that a particular child shines at. I've always felt it's our job to affirm that, to let them know that we've noticed them and we value what they seem to love. I think that's one of the most important roles that we have played as clergy.
So who's the first person? I don't know if it's John Stein or somebody else. Who's the first person to say you should be a rabbi?
Well, the first person to give me the idea of becoming a rabbi was the rabbi himself at the temple, who I thought, and I was wrong because I was young and impetuous. I thought he was the worst rabbi on the planet, and that I could do this differently and therefore better. And that was actually where the first impetus came. And then there was the rabbi who threw me up against the wall. So there were two rabbis who negatively influenced me. It wasn't until Joel Whitstein, of blessed memory, who was the rabbi who ran the new educator at Woodlands. He was probably the first who made this powerful impression on me that that rabbis can be people and that they can have hearts filled with goodness and concern. So he got me back into the temple. And then Rabbi Jonathan Stein, who at the time was an HUC student and the temple youth group advisor, I then spent 4 years very closely connected to him and to his wife, not only through Temple, but he also then said, as rabbis do, I think you should consider spending a summer at the URJ summer camp. In our case, it was the one in Zionsville, Indiana, called Goldman Camp. He got me to go there and become a machon, counselor in training, and then stay on as a counselor. And that influenced me powerfully in terms of the kind of creativity one could summon and employ as a rabbi. So those are probably the two most significant people in my formative years.
So yeah, I'm gonna build on that. So you go to rabbinic school, and you think, I'm gonna find a home as a rabbi. Is the home you found the place when you were a young rabbinic student you thought you'd be? Was that like the vision for you? Was that the kind of place in rabbi you thought you'd become?
Is this a leading question about Woodlands?
No, it's not. It's about you. Like, did you have, like, you grew up, when you say the Temple in Cincinnati, you mean the Temple?
There are any number of large Reform synagogues in Cincinnati, and my temple was Isaac Mayer Wise Temple, named for the founder of Reform Judaism. And yes, it was kind of a flagship. Certainly in the Midwest, it was a flagship congregation. And it influenced me, I'd say, quite negatively, because it was classical reform. Many of us remember classical reform, and I was growing up in the 70s and going to Goldman Camp, where we were experimenting with a whole different kind. You guys may love or hate this story. I was so disrespectful to my rabbi. I remember coming home from my first summer at Goldman Camp, and I had heard new Jewish music.
Debbie Friedman.
What?
Debbie Friedman.
Debbie Friedman, Klepper Friedlander, they were writing music that was really changing the landscape, not just of Jewish music, but of what it meant to engage in Jewish spiritual life. And I came home and made an appointment to see the senior rabbi. And I sat with him and I told him how important the musical experience had been to me there. And would he consider bringing Klepper Friedlander's Shalom Rav to the congregation? That's the one that goes Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha. Pretty familiar to us now. At the time, his response to me was, "Over my dead body." And what I will tell people I said, I didn't actually say it, but I certainly thought it was, "I can wait." And in fact, that's what happened. The Reform movement really moved as reform is supposed to do. You may have noticed that it's called Reform Judaism, not Reformed Judaism. It didn't just change once, but it's changing all the time. And it's the young people who are what they grow up with. And as we hope, they're going to come in and become the new leadership of our synagogues, because that's what keeps our synagogues alive and vibrant. Well, when they're being exposed to this new stuff, they're coming for us. And I even saw it in my last years at Woodlands that the young people were starting to bring stuff in that I wasn't necessarily comfortable with, but it's going to be their Judaism. And I need to make room for them. This rabbi wasn't able to do so yet, but in time, it was really amazing to see that happen. Did I answer your question, Rabbi?
No, you started. So did you want to go to a place that was sort of like a creative alternative, a place you could do this stuff? Well, I mean, was that the ideal? You didn't want to, I mean, I'm assuming?
I was probably completely ignorant of where I wanted to go. I think I was very fortunate that upon coming back from Israel, I didn't get to Woodlands right after Israel. Right after Israel, I actually did High Holy Days at a pretty classically Reformed congregation on Long Island. But the following year, I interviewed for an internship at Woodlands Community Temple. And I don't know if you guys have been to Woodlands. It's not quite as crunchy granola now as it was when I visited it. But it was one of those places that had a reputation. You know, people weren't even sure we were Jewish there. Although once you go in, you find out that it's quite lovely and quite passionate about Judaism. But it has always been small and intimate and tried to maintain that feel. It has also been radically democratic and egalitarian. When they built the building, they built it with 1 million windows so that we would never forget that we were part of the outside world. And they built it without a raised bima because they didn't want their clergy on a level higher than they were. We were all equals in that synagogue. The true story probably is they couldn't afford anything more than that, but that is the story that they began to tell and really has become part of the pathos, anyway, how they define themselves. And in my 26 years at Woodlands, I really tried to preserve that. But so going there as the student rabbi, as the intern to Mark Dov Shapiro, Zichrono Livracha, I learned how Judaism can be not exactly summer camp all year round, but to have that kind of feeling, kind of what I also see at Larchmont Temple. In Larchmont Temple, your facility is certainly larger, and your walls stand up better than ours do. But you have a rabbi who is not just wise and a brilliant teacher, but he's also one of the nicest people that I've ever met, and he doesn't hide that. I really meant it when I asked you, are you like that when I'm not around? Because to me, it's just so important to bring that both to life and to Jewish leadership, and to have this guy with you since when, Jeffrey? 1987?
1987, when we got ordained.
Wow.
You know what? Inertia.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, I fell in love with Woodlands, and I think that defined the kind of rabbi and the kind of congregation I wanted to be at. And so when I had the opportunity to come back to Woodlands, there was no question in my mind that that was the place where I would love to build a career.
So
I just say that.
Realize that Billy was, has been my dearest and best friend for a long time. You can't get through rabbinical school alone. You need somebody else. And you need somebody to confide in, to complain to study with, and what we did more than anything else was none of those. It was to create with. Yeah. And so we created programs all the time. In the second year that Billy's talking about, Billy and I were the Shabbaton coordinators at Sha'arei Tefillah in the city for 7th graders. And Laura Kisner, now Gervis, had this idea that we would not have the 7th graders come for a whole semester. Instead, they would come Friday night for what, like 3 or 4 hours, Billy?
Overnight.
Was it overnight?
It was overnight.
Oh my God. It was overnight. I don't remember that. But
it was actually terrible because it was 7th graders coming once a month, so they didn't really have a relationship or a connection. It was pretty disastrous, but the program that they got was really great.
Program was great because we wrote it. Yes. So I have never found a creative programming partner, somebody who could vision with me and see things that I didn't see, and also bring things out of me that I wouldn't even know I was thinking, as Billy. And so we write this curriculum, a Jewish identity curriculum that spirals out, and we win the BJE award for educational something. I don't know what. Did we get money? I don't think we got money. I got a certificate.
I got money. You got the certificate.
I can't believe you. So this is our relationship in a nutshell. Billy takes the money. I get a cup of coffee. So it does. So for me, rabbinic school was wonderful because I felt at home there, because when I walked in, my friend Billy was there. And so that's why it was home for me. As you're going through rabbinical school and envisioning, was it home for you? Were there challenges sort of on that journey, that part of the journey that would stand out?
That's an excellent question. I'm glad you asked that, Rabbi.
I know some of the answer.
So growing up in Cincinnati, did I mention I grew up in Cincinnati? And meeting many, many rabbinical students who hated HUC. And I became friendly with a lot of them. So I heard a lot of their critiques of the place. I expected to hate HUC also. There were aspects of it that I was not fond of. But by and large, I found the instructors, the professors, to be as an aggregate group, with a few exceptions, maybe just one, just wonderful human beings. And while school was really hard for me, it was really hard. I'm just so tickled that I get to be called the visiting scholar this weekend, because if there's one way I don't define myself, it's as a scholar. I love learning, I love teaching, but it's super difficult for me. And I'm sure if I got that diagnosed, I'd probably find out why, but that's just the way it is. And so HUC was really hard. I got a lot of encouragement from my caring instructors, but most importantly, I had Jeffrey. And he was my study partner, and he helped me to get through all of my classes and to actually learn something from them. Though sometimes neither of us learned anything. And it turns out that the class wasn't about learning the material. Sometimes it turned out it was about being with the professor. We had any number of classes where the professor was the topic per se. And we did our best to learn Dr. Kravitz from Dr. Kravitz, to learn Dr. Orlinsky from Dr. Orlinsky, to learn Dr. Chernick from Dr. Chernick. I wrote a letter recently to Rabbi Michael Chernick, who lives in Teaneck. This is an Orthodox rabbi who dedicated himself to teaching the future leadership of the Reform movement, one of the dearest human beings on the planet. And he knows I was not a star pupil. But he also knows that I took every class that I could with him and struggled through all of it because I wanted to be in the same room with him. And I wrote him a letter just about 6 months ago to tell him about my desire to teach Talmud at Woodlands, not because I was very good at Talmud, not because I was an expert in it, but because of my time with him and my sense that Talmud was more about learning how to be a human, even more so than learning how to be Orthodox. And I thanked him for inspiring me to do that and to share him with my congregation for over 20 years. He wrote me back and said, I need to talk to you. I thought I was going to get yelled at. It was like being back at HUC again. I called him up and he said that this is one of the dearest letters I've ever received. He said, this is going in the box. I said, what's the box? He says, that's where I'm putting stuff I want my grandchildren to have. So it ran hot and cold in terms of classes and instructors, but mostly hot. And my time with Jeffrey was not only time to survive together, but also to engage in this creative process that found us up on the 5th floor, which was where unused classrooms were. And we would just camp out, and every now and then a class would show up and say, we have a class here, and we'd say, sorry, room's in use. And we just stayed up there and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And we were just so proud and excited about what we were able to create, which was essentially Jewish experiential educational experiences for young people, which hopefully turned a generation of young people on to Jewish living, both at Camp Coleman, at Shari Tefillah in Manhattan, and eventually in our own synagogues when we made use of those materials as well. And to this day, I get phone calls from other rabbis and cantors in the field who want to use something from those curricula.
Meet my friend Billy, who is the most self-effacing human being. And Billy was academics aren't what make a good student. Insight and understanding is what makes a good student. Billy learned exceedingly well. and was highly sensitive and sensitized to the people who were teaching us. So he didn't just learn the teaching, whatever that subject was. He learned the people, and he learned from them and helped me do the same thing. So, and so Billy is a little too self-deprecating. In fact, way too self-deprecating. He became a great rabbinic student because of that. And we taught each other. But Billy taught me a lesson. Minna asked about, what do they train you in rabbinic school? And why did Rabbi Poehler have a different voice from the Bima than he did? Wait, when you talk, Rabbi Poehler was the best crisis rabbi I know. He's my model. Something happens, he's there. Somebody dies, sends a basket of food to the Shiva house. He follows up. 3 weeks later, he called. He was great. On the Bima, he had this different voice. And of course, maybe, I don't know, could have been, he went to Cincinnati in the late, I don't know when, in early 50s. So maybe it was a Cincinnati thing, or maybe it was a rabbi thing. But Billy, did you ever counsel me in that area?
I seem to remember one conversation where I encouraged you to learn from Rabbi Poehler all the best that he had to offer. But that voice that he used on the Bima that Minna was referring to, that maybe we've moved on to a new era and that we don't have to use those rabbinic voices anymore.
Billy doesn't remember, but it was before this. It was in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
That Billy said to me, this is why Billy's such a valuable friend, but beyond that, why he's my rabbi's rabbi, because I was in Brooklyn. I was the rabbinic intern at Beth Elohim. I ran the religious school. I hired a whole bunch of rabbinic students. It was great. For 3 years, I was the intern as well. And I would give sermons like once a month or so. And I would write my sermons oftentimes in Billy's apartment between 6th and 7th in Park Slope. And on what street, Billy?
Carroll Street.
Right, Carroll Street.
734 and a half. It was like a Hogwarts.
It was like you go down a little bit. Yeah, it was great. Great apartment. And I gave a sermon. I don't remember what it was on. Malcolm Stern, who was my mentor rabbi, was there. May he rest in peace. Wow. He was a big time rabbi, historian, as well as the head of the placement office at the time. And he said, oh, great sermon. Billy came up to me and said the following: if you ever talk in a different voice, I'll kill you on the spot. That's what Billy said. So I clearly had adopted Rabbi Weider's, Jerry Weider, his voice, his rabbinic voice. And, as anybody will tell you, I learned from my friend, just be you. If there's a difference in your voice, are you putting on airs? Are you trying to be somebody else? So Billy taught me an invaluable lesson. And the threat of death reinforced that.
Yes, I noticed that was effective. And you've done very well. I have few complaints, but I'll share them with you after the weekend's over.
I am quite certain you will. Let me see. We are going to get to that. We're going to get to that. Somebody asked a question. Yep. Andy Harrison. Yep. So Billy and Ellen met.
Oh, wait. Before you go on.
Yeah,
I wanted to make one comment on the chat column, and I love the stuff that everybody's writing. You all seem to like your rabbi a fair amount. And I don't want to dissuade you of that, certainly not. But what I did want to do is say that a really crucial part of my Hebrew Union College experience was not only did I befriend him because I thought he was rich and he'd give me money, but he is such a good soul. And you all know this so well. And as I learned this, I realized that I had as much, if not more, to learn from him about being a person, being a mensch, being a rabbi. So funny to two young guys who don't know anything about being a rabbi, but I knew that whatever kind of rabbi he was going to become, I wanted to emulate as much of that as I could. And so I watched him and I listened and I tried to learn. Hey, I never told a story in my life until I met your rabbi. And I listened to him teach through his stories. And I said, that is a tool that I want to employ. So you changed my rabbinate, man.
And I befriended Billy because he took the coolest notes of anybody in rabbinic school on graph paper, and he kept it in the line. Yes. And it was the coolest, neatest writing. And I thought, a guy who can do this, I gotta know. The truth is, I was a fan of Billy. I admired him and sort of revered him because of all the things he could do that I couldn't. And he said, Billy spoke his mind in a way that I never usually dared to. And I sort of said, wow, that guy's got something. I got it. And so I listened.
He's an idiot.
Billy was sort of E.F. Hutton for me. So you get together with Ellen, who grew up in Texas, right?
Yes.
And was it? I'm going to ask this question because our families, start connecting. I can remember Katie Dreskin's, naming that I did, her baby naming, her Brit Chaim, on 23rd Street, right, in Manhattan, and being sort of part of your life. But as you and Ellen sort of get going, because she's a cantor, she was in Israel with us before cantors were allowed to come to Israel, were asked to come to Israel.
There was no cantorial program in Israel. She had finished 1 year of HUC in New York, while I was still doing something else, pursuing musical theater. And then when it was time for me to matriculate to HUC and go off to Israel, she just came along for the ride. But they let her take classes while she was there with us.
So did you ever dream of, and did it ever happen, that you and Ellen would serve together one congregation?
Okay. By the way, Ellen being in Israel that year, HUC was watching her, and they decided that the experience was so worthwhile for her that I think that really tipped the balance. I'm sure they'd been thinking about it for a long time, but it was after that they pretty soon thereafter instituted a first year in Israel program for all cantorial students. Do educational students go also, Jeffrey?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Good. Ellen, last night, I think she alluded to this. Ellen and I kind of fell in love over music. We were in a production of Godspell, which is where we really got to know each other. And then we remained friends. We had relationships with other people who were friends. It was sort of a circle that kept our lives intertwined, but it would be 5 years of friendship before we'd actually start dating each other. Along the way, we sang a lot of folk music. Last night we sang Loggins and Messina, Run River Run. That's a song that we've been singing together since the late 1970s. And I think, and we had the same guitar. We both had Ovation guitars, which were these guitars that had round fiberglass backs. And mine was a 12-string and hers was a 6-string. And we thought our relationship was made in heaven because we had similar guitars. We started song leading together. I think Woodlands actually hired us at one point. This was long before we really got involved. A young rabbi there, Peter Rubenstein, hired us to do an adult retreat. And then they had this like 10-hour confirmation blessing service where the rabbi gives individual private blessings to the kids and someone's playing live music throughout. And Ellen and I would go and do that marathon. So we started, I think our relationship is really built on a foundation of music and Jewish experiences, although we never went to the same camp until Coleman. Obviously the dream that a rabbi and a cantor might run a congregation together was wonderful, but how's something like that going to happen? When I was hired by Woodlands as the rabbinic intern, they hired Ellen as their student cantor. They didn't have a full-time cantor at the time. They were hiring students. And so they got us, I think the same year. And when I finished out my internship, and she finished out HUC, actually, she was a year ahead of me. They hired her full-time as cantor educator there. I got ordained a year after that and made arrangements to stay on. Essentially, I was the intern for 4 years instead of 2 years, but in the second 2 years, after I'd become a rabbi, we called it assistant rabbi, but it was the same job. And then the rabbi left, and we got a year where she and I were the interim, or I was the interim, and she was still there running cantor educator, and we got to run the place together. And it was really a wonderful, wonderful experience. And then we moved off to Cleveland, where we worked in a gigantic Jewish institution called Fairmont Temple, where she worked in the religious school and I worked in the other end of the building, which was, I kid you not, a half a mile walk away to get from one office to the next. And we did that while we were in Cleveland. And then when we came back, we toyed a while with doing Woodlands together, but she was growing spiritually. You know the joke about the husband and wife who joined a church and they left church after church because they just couldn't find a style of worship that agreed with them. And in time, they actually prayed in different corners of the house because they stopped agreeing with each other. Ellen and I have grown spiritually, and her loves Jewishly are satisfied in other places like Institute of Jewish Spirituality. And she's doing great stuff there that's even more far out than Woodlands Community Temple. So we didn't get to have the career together, but she's been my closest advisor, certainly through all my years at Woodlands. I rarely did anything without getting the thumbs up or thumbs down from her.
One of the ways that I think rabbis and cantors survive is to have a life beyond the rabbinate and cantorate. Not everybody serves a congregation, but those of us who do, it can be all consuming. And so for us, full disclosure, no surprise, our families were intimately connected. And when Billy and Ellen went to Cleveland, I felt like he had jumped ship and abandoned me, even though I knew he was going to serve with David Gelfand, who was the rabbi who I was an intern for, because when we were in rabbinic school in Jerusalem, Billy gets I don't know, you didn't get a call. Maybe you got a letter or something, a telegram from Gelfand. I need an intern. I'm going to New Jersey, at Trenton. And Billy said, well, I can't do it, but my friend Jeffrey will. And that's how I got the job. It was no interview, nothing. But our growing families and the connection we shared, in a lot of ways, I think were a counterbalance and a place of home, certainly for me.
Yes.
And I look forward to any time being with the Dreskins, because it was a perspective that I didn't get any place else. So how did that evolve for you, Uncle Billy? Over the years, but certainly from way back. And why was it important as a part of your journey? What did it give to you that maybe?
Yeah. Hey, it started in Israel. Jeffrey, Ellen, and I met standing in line to register for classes at HUC on the very first day. And that was the germ, the infectious germ of the beginning. And soon after, we would meet Susan, and it was slow. It didn't happen right away because you guys didn't live right near us. You weren't in the same building, were you?
No, we lived on Karen Hayes Road. We lived not far from HUC itself. Would you guys?
And we were over by the Islamic Museum.
Oh, that's right. You live far away.
Yeah, so it wasn't easy for us to see each other outside of school. So it happened only little by little, but it was clear that we liked each other. And by we now, I mean the constellation of the four of us, because if you ever had a chance to experience Susan Sirkman, she's quite a force of nature. And we just were bowled over by it. Not always positively. Susan and I had a very loving hate relationship with each other. But we were very, very fond of each other through the years, though we rarely let each other know, because that would be giving in. But our families grew close over the year in Israel. And then coming back, we lived in Brooklyn together. So we got to see each other a fair amount of time. Then you guys went, crazy that you went and made babies during rabbinical school. Not just baby, but you made babies. You had the twins. And that became a whole new experience that like, oh my God, consumed you. And I felt a little bit like we had parenting duties also. I remember changing your boys' diapers.
I remember you putting it on the outside of their clothes, Billy.
Look, yeah, in an emergency, that would work also, okay? Let's just remember that. And you'll be happy to know that when Katie came along, I learned to change diapers the real way. But we got to know the kids from the very beginning, and our kids got to know each other because we would throw them together when we came over to each other's houses. We didn't spend a whole lot of time together because Larchmont Temple is a pretty busy place, as you may have noticed, and Woodlands is also a pretty busy place. So we didn't have a whole lot of extra time, but when we found the time, we would see each other. And often we would spend a night of Hanukkah together. We would have Passover Seder together, and occasional other times. And the kids just would take off. I don't remember them ever not enjoying one another's company. To this day, they remain close to each other. My son Aiden and the twins, the boys, have a standing regular Dungeons and Dragons game online every week. They spend 4 or 5 hours together, whether it's in person or not. And it's just, I cannot tell you how happy it makes me to hear their voices, even if just on speaker, to know that our boys are in each other's lives. It's just the greatest thing, because as you've heard, Jeffrey and I have very much enjoyed and valued each other's company over the years. Selfishly speaking, we'd like our children to like each other's company because that gives us more time to spend together. But also the fact that it's moved to a second generation is unbelievably.
Yeah. Susan and Ellen were almost like soulmate friends. They understood each other in a way that, more deeply than Billy and I understood each other on a whole different level, and appreciate each other because they were really in many ways so different. And we go way back to a vacation in Tiberias in Israel, where Susan was cheating in Scrabble and Billy basically tossed the board and said, "I will not play with this. I'm out of here." Right. So, Billy and Susan were great together because it was like this. But having our families grow together was the added gift. My family came to see Uncle Billy and Auntie Ellen, but especially Uncle Billy, as a rabbi they could love. And in all his irreverence and wisecracking humor, and deadpan jokes, and amazing insight that they don't listen to their father when he tells them about the Passover Seder. They listen to Uncle Billy. So they would quote Uncle Billy to me. And I would say, that guy doesn't know from his, what are you telling me? But they, so much so, and this is shocking, that Sophie, my daughter, to this day, and in fact, I have to tell you something, Uncle Billy, she's very upset. The Saturday night of Hanukkah is the one night she's booked. And she said, "Oh my God," she started tearing up. I can't change it. What am I going to do? Uncle Billy's going to be so upset. I said, "Sweetie, Uncle Billy would want you to be with all your 7th grade girlfriends who are doing Secret Santa.
That's not
in the
true.
city.
No, you tell her I'm upset.
I will tell her, but I'm not going to make her. No, Tyler said, "Oh, good, we get to go to Billy and Ellen's." But Sophie looks to Billy as, in a real way, more than an uncle. It's almost like the adult who's spiritual and cool and thought and smart and is sort of her defender in a way. And Sophie needs that in life. And I think that came about over the course of time from watching you, when Jonah died, watching you when Susan died. I mean, I think Sophie's the byproduct of loss. And she looks to you as a source of strength, which to me is such a gift.
Our children, I don't know really what it's like in a lot of clergy families, but your and my experience certainly have been that our children do not see us parents as their spiritual guides. We're mom and dad, and we cannot break out of that. So the fact that our kids have these other clergy, that my daughter, when she got married, of course, Uncle Jeffrey would be the one who would do the ceremony, not Dad, but Uncle Jeffrey would do the ceremony because you're her rabbi. And while you're much more than that, I would say, in addition to being Uncle Jeffrey, you are her rabbi. And that we could give that gift to each other's children is one of the most satisfying parts of this very challenging career that each of us has taken on. Not gratifying, one of the most gratifying parts of it is to see that happen.
Yeah. And I mean, home, when home is broken, by loss, it becomes a different kind of place. And you have to sort of, in a way, rebuild or reconfigure, and figure out how it's going to be home. It's going to be different, but it's still going to be home. When Jonah, died, it was devastating, beyond devastating, beyond words. And, and we I'm going to ask you, and then I'm going to tell you the story. How do you find your way back to what home can be or should be after something like that?
I will start this by saying, I only know what has worked for me. I don't know the general answer to any of these questions. Death can be so painful and can result in the fracture of home and of life. And that journey back can be the hardest journey there is to make. I don't know what makes it a successful journey. That I don't know what allows a person to get back. My guess is love is probably a really crucial ingredient. That when family can continue to love each other, to hold each other, that's probably, and the extended family, and now I'm talking about the Sirkman family, when that love continues to hold you beyond Shiva, beyond Shloshim, I think that very long journey can take place. I know that not from the moment that Jonah died, because it was awful. Those of you who don't know, Jonah was 19. He was my middle child, is my middle child. Still don't know whether it's past tense or present tense. And he died during his freshman year of college. So that obviously shattered us. And I can remember how non-functional I was for the first week or so. And then how life started out from then on, it was very quiet and and stationed at home until I felt strong enough to come back out, to come back to Temple, to come back into life. When that happened, our family held on to each other. And people like the Sirkmans, and especially the Sirkmans, Susan comes in and, you know, she doesn't ask permission. She just takes over and she gets our house ready for Shiva. And it was just, we had no idea what or how we could do that. And so to see her doing that it was like a little tornado moving through the house that felt like a hug. It was like, there she is, there she is. That's just so nice of her. And then Uncle Jeffrey is taking care of the ritual side of things. And he's sitting with us and doing his rabbi thing, which I imagine was, I mean, I don't know that we've ever talked about this, what that felt like for you, who has known Jonah since he was born, to sit there and to help us bury him. My guess is, as a rabbi, you have a job to do, so you do it. But
you may not remember, because you were, you called us, the night, that you guys were running up there and to Buffalo, and Susan and I, it was like 11:45 or something like that, and we were just up and we couldn't go to sleep, but we went to sleep eventually, and then we just sat around after Jonah died and talked. I didn't do a rabbinic intake. I didn't ask you a single question. I just sat around your house for around 6 or 7 hours and took notes. And then, was able to celebrate, his 19 years. It was like the most important thing I had ever done as a rabbi.
You and I have sat with so many families at exactly this moment. Yeah. And with every one of those moments, and I imagine you're going to agree wholeheartedly on this, it is an honor to be invited in to this very fragile, loving, tearful time, and to be asked to be the facilitator of saying goodbye to this loved one, whether young or old, whether sudden or long-term. To say goodbye is, I guess we all want to do it right, whatever that means. And to have someone who takes us by the hand means everything in the world. The fact that it was Uncle Jeffrey added an additional element to it, which was just so comforting for my children, who were not going to be comfortable if just anyone had walked in, and not necessarily going to be forthcoming. As I recall, everyone was sharing memories. I had prepared, because I always prepare. I had started that little piece of paper that I wrote memories about Jonah on, because I knew that was your job to collect those. And that was the beginning of a whole thing. But the fact that my children were contributing to that also. And my son was only 14 at the time, Aiden. So that was something that one would not expect a 14-year-old to participate in the intake like that. So it was really great that it was Uncle Jeffrey to help us move through that. And just, and it only started there. It has, for them, it continued through Shiva, because you would come and you would be with us. Whenever you had time, you came over, whether it was leading services, which I loved, or just sitting with us. And then afterwards, staying in touch and being with us throughout to this day. And, I wish that we didn't each have this grievous loss that we carry with us. But when Susan died, then suddenly we were taking care of each other.
Susan, when she was dying, probably a month or two before, said, "Well, you're going to give my eulogy, right?" And I said, "Dolly," I said, "I don't know if I can do that." She said, "Well, I'm not asking if you can." And then I said, "Well, who's going to do the funeral?" She said, "Well, Billy and Ellen." She said, tell them I want them to sing. I said, okay. And then probably a week later, I said, what should they sing? And she said, I don't know, maybe Ain't Got a Barrel of Money. I said, really? And they did.
Yeah.
That's a song Susan and Ellen would dress up and do a show, among other things. And Ain't Got a Barrel of Money must be a 1940s song, I'm guessing. Maybe 30s, maybe before. Frank Grant will know. Right? But not because Frank Grant's 99, but because he has an entertainment background. He knows songs. He's a songwriter. So, for Billy to do the funeral and for Billy and Ellen to be so, at that moment, I think, again, I'm going back to my daughter, who was broken and, is, I think, going to be challenged every day by the loss. Billy is a source of comfort and wisdom that her daddy can never be.
What we were able to give to our children through those horrible, horrible moments, that my kids could sit in the sanctuary at Woodlands, Jonah's casket on the bema, and Uncle Jeffrey standing up there too, made it survivable for them. And I could see, looking out into the Larchmont sanctuary, your kids sitting with you, looking up and seeing me up there. You can't say it was a comfortable experience, but certainly more comforting than it might otherwise have been. And that is the kind of gift that we have been able to give to each other over the years. And to get back to the theme, our homes are expanded as a result. Our homes include, yours includes a house in Ardsley, New York, and mine one in Larchmont, New York. And they're very much bases for all of us. And the occupants inside are so meaningful and welcome as part of all of our lives.
Yeah. 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 So what is that? What is that? I mean, there's a lot of questions I have, of course, but what is it? What does it do to your faith journey? Like, how do you, I remember having breakfast with you every week for a couple of months, meeting at that diner behind the Westchester, whatever that diner is, and then it got less. But I remember as you were reintegrating into life, and then, it may be years later, but how does your faith journey evolve so you can still feel like, God's nickname, one of his God's nicknames is Makom, like Makom Shelley B. O'Have. There's a pun there, which is the place. God is the place. Genesis 28, Jacob comes upon a certain place and rests for the night. The rabbis say that's the place, that's God. So being the guy in rabbinic school, about whom one professor said, when you wrote a paper that sort of reframed God's existence, said, a nice guitar and a good smile will not get you through rabbinic school, or something like that. I don't remember what he said, but, you didn't approach God in the old days, a long time ago, in the way many people did. How does your faith survive and evolve?
I remember shortly after Jonah died, I was invited to write something for the URJ, and I had titled it God and the Big Bump. And I reflected on the impact that losing a loved one so young and so suddenly, and so ridiculously, how that affected my faith. And the upshot was it didn't affect it at all. My faith remains intact. Now, last night I told you I'm not a fundamentalist. I don't believe literally in a God who is hearing our prayers, who is interacting with history and changing events according to God's will. I don't believe any of that, but I believe in the mystery of the universe and of creation, and that something in the universe wants us to live our lives in a certain way according to certain principles. And my faith in that has always been strong. My desire to teach that to others has always been strong. And Jonah's death did not lessen that in any way. I certainly didn't blame God, because I never saw God as an entity that interacted with us. But I also didn't see this as some kind of vindictive act against me or against my little boy. He was the victim of physics, of maybe some poor choices, and the fact that the world works according to the laws of gravity of physics. And if you try to violate those, you may be in for some really big surprises. So that's what his death was all about. And in the end, the only thing that changed for me about my faith is, while I had never believed in the afterlife before, for the simple reason that I only thought about the afterlife in terms of me. Then I don't need to continue on after eternity. I like the idea that we are like a wave in the ocean, and for a while we rise up above the surface of the water. We have identity. You see that wave over there. We live our lives, and then when our lives end, the wave goes down and rejoins the global body of water. I'm fine with that until Jonah died, and I decided, oh, well, nobody really knows whether there's an afterlife or not. And I really would like to see Jonah again. And so I decided I'm going to believe in the afterlife. There's no harm, as long as I'm careful about how I live here and now. There's no harm in believing in the afterlife. And so now I do, because I'm going to see him again someday. Some of you might be thinking, silly Rabbi. And I might be, but that's okay. It gives me something to think about that puts a smile on my face. I spent a lot of time immersed in the memories of Jonah, hanging on to those precious pieces of his life that I can. It would be nice if there would be a present to his life one day again, where we're creating new experiences for each other. So in terms of faith, that's the only piece that was altered upon his dying. But other than that, I remain fully comfortable and passionate about Jewish life, Jewish values, the principles of living a life dedicated to trying to hear God's voice and trying to live life in a way that God would be proud of me for doing so. None of that changes.
That's awesome. Yeah, but which great. I mean, and you know, faith can evolve. You can grow, because life changes and you're in a different place. Your response to whatever faith might be, continues to, to adapt, and also to consider possibilities you didn't. Faith isn't a rational system. It doesn't have to be a rational system alone. So, I believe that, the rabbis taught in the Talmud, I don't remember where, life and death is separated by a very thin veil.
Impenetrable
veil. I'm a big believer, right? That my wife at many moments is just on the other side, and she's doing this. What the hell are you thinking? Right?
Yeah,
and
I hear it too.
Jonah's doing the same thing. So I do believe that souls have a transcendent existence, and they communicate with us in ways that are conscious and very much or subconscious. So did I believe this always? Yeah, I told people, but once somebody dies who's very, very close, you need to believe, or you need to grasp. So that's part of the ongoing evolution of what faith's about. And one of the other reasons I think that I'm going to go back to my daughter loves Uncle Billy is because he lives this life. What you see is what you get. Uncle Billy, and he'll tell you just what he thinks, but that she watched him when Jonah died. she remembers and talked to me about all of us at, doing markers on the casket, right? And writing messages to Jonah. And she years later said, that was probably the coolest thing I've ever seen at a funeral. So Uncle Billy doesn't think like anybody else. And though he would deny it, he wears his love on his sleeve. And he shares it in ways that are just, natural, organic extensions of who he is. And he's now retired, which is something I'm transitioning. You notice how smooth that transition was? That was good.
Come on. Come to the dark side.
He's now retired. So how is the journey evolving? And is home, besides the bathroom, which I think you should tell everybody about, is home being reshaped, or how you feel understand home?
We're fixing up the bathroom. It has nothing to do with me spending inordinate amounts of time in the bathroom. Jeffrey, watch what you're saying, man. First thing I want to add, and I'll see if I can tie this into retirement, but I want to put a tag on the faith discussion. And that is, while and I'm sure every one of you on this call with us makes our own choices as to what it is we are going to believe. I talked about this last night, feeling so lucky to be part of the Jewish community. You and I are part of a tradition that, like Susan Sirkman, is constantly pushing and constantly nudging us to be better people, better tomorrow than we are today. So that wherever I've been in my life, whether it was growing up in Cincinnati, whether it was at HUC, whether it was defining the kind of rabbi I wanted to be at Woodlands, whether it was surviving loss, or now adjusting to retirement, God's voice, and I want you to take that in a metaphorical sense, God's voice is always out there waiting for us to try and hear it. And we do most of our hearing when some human is talking to us, or we're reading some ancient text, and it speaks to us. We hear God's voice around the Chevra Torah table. We hear God's voice when we are learning, when we're at Shabbat worship. And of course, we hear God's voice when we bend down to help someone in need who can't be of any possible use to us, other than to give us an outlet to do the right thing in life. That never stops. It won't stop in retirement. And I thank my lucky stars that those people came into my life in my teenage years who showed me the deep, abiding value of this tradition of ours. And even though I am both a wretched Kohen, as Dr. A. Stanley Dreyfus would describe me, and also an incorrigibly progressive liberal Jew the rabbi who doesn't wear the kippah and the bima, I remain devoted to the principles of Jewish life, have adored teaching them and living by them and sharing them with the people that I love, none of which will change. I think the balances will shift in retirement. Spending this weekend with you at Larchmont Temple, this is my first time really back in a Jewish building since June 30th of
it's
this
about
year.
Time you came to Temple. That's all I want to say.
I banished myself from Woodlands Community Temple. I wanted Mara, who's the new rabbi there. She'd been working with me for 10 or 12 years. So it wasn't like she was just getting her feet wet, but still I wanted her to have time to really be seen as the rabbi. So I banished myself and said I would stay away, and I'll go back in the fall sometime into the building. So this has been really wonderful to be able to sit around the Chevra Torah table, to be able to hear the wisdom of the ancients through our liturgy, and just to hang out with Jews and the people who love them. All of that has been really terrific. And it's just another element of retirement as I figure out what the new configuration is going to be. It will always be about defining home. The great thing about retirement, I think, there are still responsibilities, but I get to choose more of them than I ever have before. And while I consider myself very fortunate to have spent nearly 3 decades at Woodlands, because I've loved these people and the ideals, the fact that they admire the same Jewish ideals that I have and want to learn and try to live by them. Oh my God, how lucky can you be to be a rabbi in a community like that? Now, not having to spend all my time there, I get to spend more time with that right there. I get to spend more time with the little doggy who's sitting right there, and the child who I think has finally woken up out there, and my wife, and all of that, and this guy too. You want to tell them about our phone calls? I'm always bothering them. I just call because I don't have anything to do.
I love that. I love that Uncle Billy will call me usually when he's walking Charlie, usually between 9:30 and 9:45 at night. And we'll stay on the phone for half an hour, 40 minutes. We won't say anything. Billy, by the way, as he's walking the dog and talking to me, he thinks he's the mayor of the neighborhood, says hello to every fakakta person he meets. And I have to listen to all the conversations. But beyond that, how do you still feel like you're on the journey? And how do you still feel like, that you still have more to grow when it comes to finding and being totally at home in the world than in yourself? You have to have a compass. You have to have somebody who's the sounding board. You have to have somebody you can say anything to, you can share doubts with, you can share fears with, right? And who will not only support you, but challenge you. I've had that for the past almost 40 years in that guy. So if you do have that in life, you get it. You may be married to that person, by the way. That's great. I was married to that person, though there were certain things that I could say to Billy that I couldn't say to Susan, because Susan wouldn't be as understanding because she would think whatever. She was a little bit judgmental, right? Dolly, if you're listening.
A little bit.
Right? She had strong opinions.
She sure did.
And wasn't afraid to share them and make her opinion known. But I think you find home and still feel like you have more steps on the journey by having somebody like that. So there are people in the chat, Billy, who are saying, oh, let's make this an annual event. Let's bring Rabbi Dreskin back every year. I will tell you that Billy will be back to teach something or do something. I'm hoping to maybe get him to come and do a course next year with a different learning theme. But Billy knows, because he's not allowed to enter Woodlands Community Temple, whenever he wants to hang out here, we would all love to have him.
I know that that's just a flimsy veil for wanting Ellen to come back. So anytime you want to invite me so that I'll bring Ellen, y'all just let me know.
That we will do. That we will do. Right, we just make sure we have an. That's why Susan. They're all talking about Susan and you. Anyway, I want to say, if we can end now, Larry, we okay to wrap up?
Yes, I think so. Gone on the long end. I haven't wanted to intervene because the talk was so engrossing.
Yeah, no, listen. Just to say that to have Billy together here with us this weekend has been a gift beyond words. He knows that. I'm sure it's going to cost me. And to know that he is there, not just for me, but if something he said this weekend you wonder about, or you shoot him an email. What the hell does he have to do? He'll answer it. I guarantee you.
Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. RabbiBillyDreskin@gmail.com. And if you can't remember that, ask Uncle Jeffrey. You cannot email me unclebilly@gmail.com, though. Maybe I'll get that one now.
That would be cool. That'd be cool.
Let me just say, I have adored being with you all this weekend. Thank you so much for inviting me in. It has just meant everything to me to be able to come and spend the weekend with my friend Jeffrey and with the people who love him and who he loves so very much. And for so many years now, you guys are just a great community. Thank you.
Thanks, Uncle Billy.
All
All
right.
right, folks.
Okay.
Go have a lovely day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. See you.